It used to mean home, freedom, the wild, clean perfume of the forest after rain, tangled with wood smoke and pack and belonging. Sienna would breathe it in as a girl and feel her wolf Aria stir with delight, a soft rumble in her chest like contented thunder. Now the same scent seeped through the warped logs of the cabin, and it tasted only of imprisonment. It was the smell of the bars on her window, of the endless trees that watched her with silent indifference, of the territory that had become her beautifully decorated tomb. Sienna stood at that window, her fingers resting on the cold iron of the security bar Corbin had installed for her protection. Her protection. The words were a splinter under her skin, festering. Moonlight, sharp and cold as a shard of glass, cut across the rough-hewn floorboards, stopping just short of her bare feet. She wore a soft grey dress, one of many Corbin provided. It was expensive, woven from moon silk, but it hung on her frame like a shroud. She felt its weight, a constant, gentle pressure reminding her of the hands that chose it for her. From the great room below, the sounds of the rogue pack filtered up. Raucous laughter, the clatter of tankards, the low, aggressive rumble of male voices competing. Corbin was down there holding court. She could feel him through the bond, not as a specific emotion, but as a presence. A dark, smouldering coal lodged beneath her breastbone, its heat a constant, low-grade burn. Her gaze drifted from the moon to the woods, and for the 1000th time she played the memory. Not of the end, but of the beginning. It was a punishment she inflicted on herself, a need to pinpoint the exact moment the track had forked toward this nightmare. The air had been electric that night, thick with the scent of blooming night jasmine and the promise of a summer storm. The gathering of alphas, she was there as her father's heir, the future Luna of the gentle Fallow Glen pack. And he was there. Corbin, then the proud, intense alpha of the Stone Ridge pack. Their eyes had met across the bonfire, and the world had narrowed to the space between them. The mate bond had snapped into place with a force that stole her breath, a golden chord of pure, singing joy that vibrated in her very soul. Aria had howled in ecstasy within her. She remembered the feel of his hand, large and warm, as he led her into the forest, the awe in his voice as he whispered, "My Luna, my destiny." The first kiss had tasted of wild berries and a future so bright it hurt to look at. The memory dissolved, leaving the acidic aftertaste of the present. The man downstairs was a stranger wearing her mate's face. The golden cord was now rusted, barbed, and it tugged not with love, but with possession. A soft whimper, so faint it was almost a thought, echoed in the quiet chamber of her mind. "Aria," she whispered inwardly. There was no answer, just a feeling of deep, profound ache, like a limb that had gone numb from being held in one position for too long. Her wolf was still there, but she was folded away. A shadow pressed into a corner, flinching at sudden noises. The cacophony from below peaked with a roar of laughter. Sienna flinched, her shoulder unconsciously touching the cold wall beside the window. A different memory, unwanted and sharp, sliced through her. Corbin's hand, not leading her to dance, but slamming into the wall beside her head, his eyes black with rage over a perceived slight, a polite smile she'd given a visiting beta. "You are mine," he'd snarled, his breath hot against her cheek. "Every look, every smile belongs to me. Do you need another lesson in loyalty, Sienna?" She hadn't. She'd learned that lesson weeks ago when he'd locked her in the windowless cellar for a full-day cycle after she'd tried to run the first desperate time. The lesson was simple. The bond that connected them was not a bridge, but a chain. His dominance was absolute, and her will was an insect to be crushed under his boot. Her eyes, drawn like a magnet to the one spot of true colour in the room, landed on the small wooden dresser. On it sat a simple, carved box of pale aspen wood. It was the only thing she had been able to bring from her old life. Inside, wrapped in a piece of velvet, was a river stone, smooth and flat, painted by her father with a small white flower that was their pack symbol, the evening star. He'd given it to her when she was a child, afraid of the dark. "Whenever you're scared, little moon," he'd said, his kind eyes crinkling, "hold this. It has my love in it. It will shine for you." She hadn't held it in months. Corbin considered it a weakness, a tie to a past he wanted erased. To touch it was to invite his scorn. The door to her room clicked open without a knock. Sienna didn't turn. She knew the rhythm of his presence, the way the air grew thick and still, Corbin filled the doorway. He was a magnificent monster, all broad shoulders and predatory grace. His dark hair was swept back, his handsome face illuminated by the moonlight, highlighting the severe, perfect lines of it. He held a goblet of dark wine, his fingers loose around the stem. "Gazing at the moon without me, my love?" His voice was a smooth, deep river, hiding treacherous currents. "You know it makes me uneasy when you pine." "I'm not pining," she said, her own voice a thread of sound. She trained it to be flat, devoid of the emotion that might spark him. "Just getting air." He stepped into the room, his boots silent on the fur rug. He came to stand behind her, so close she could feel the heat of his body, smell the wine and the dark, spicy scent that was uniquely his, a scent that once made her dizzy with want and now made her stomach clench. "It's cold at this window," he murmured, his free hand coming up to brush her hair aside. His fingers trailed down the side of her neck over the mating mark he'd placed there. A phantom pain, sharp and deep, throbbed under his touch. "You'll catch a chill." He was looking past her, out at the woods. His eyes, she knew, would be scanning, assessing, looking for threats. Always looking for threats. She was the greatest threat of all, simply by wanting to leave. His gaze fell to the dresser, to the aspen wood box. A stillness came over him, different from his usual controlled poise. This was the quiet before the avalanche. "You still keep that trinket," he said, the word dripping with condescension. Sienna's heart began a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. "Just a box." "It's a relic," he corrected, his voice losing its false warmth. "A symbol of the weak pack that failed to protect its own, a pack that let you come to me." He set his goblet down with a sharp click and walked to the dresser. Sienna turned now, a silent plea freezing on her lips. "Don't. Please, don't." He picked up the box. It looked absurdly small and fragile in his large warrior's hand. He didn't open it. He simply held it, his jaw working. "This is what holds you back, Sienna," he said, not looking at her. "This attachment to a past that is gone. You are the Luna of the strongest rogue pack this territory has ever known. You need no other talisman than my mark on your skin." He finally looked at her, his eyes glowing faintly with the amber of his wolf. "It is time to let the past die." "Corbin, please," the words escaped, a broken whisper. "It's all I have of him." "He is dead!" The roar was sudden, volcanic, shaking the dust from the rafters. "And his memory is a ghost that haunts my mate. I will not share you, Sienna. Not with a ghost, not with a painted stone, not with anyone." He turned and, in one swift, brutal motion, hurled the box into the stone fireplace across the room. Time seemed to fracture. Sienna watched detached as the delicate aspen wood arced through the air. It struck the hearth with a sickening crack of splintering wood. The lid flew off. The velvet pouch tumbled out, and the river stone her father's love made tangible bounced once, twice, before coming to rest in the cold ashes. A sound escaped her, not a scream, not a sob, but a small, airless gasp, as if all the breath had been punched from her lungs. The pain was instantaneous and physical, a spear of pure anguish through her chest, so sharp she stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her heart. Corbin watched her, his chest heaving, the anger slowly receding from his face, replaced by a look of cold, satisfied finality. He had excised the tumour. "Now," he said, his voice returning to that deceptively calm tone. He walked over, his footsteps echoing in the ringing silence of her soul. He cupped her chin, forcing her glassy eyes to meet his. "Now you are truly mine, unburdened." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a parody of tenderness. "Sleep, my Luna. The moon is watching." He left, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the lock engaging was the loudest sound in the world. Sienna didn't move. She stood rooted, the cold from the window leaching into her bones. The moonlight now seemed cruel, illuminating the wreckage in the hearth. She could see the corner of the pale velvet pouch in the ashes. Slowly, mechanically, she walked to the fireplace. She knelt in the grey silt, her fine dress pooling around her, becoming soiled. She didn't care. With trembling fingers, she picked up the stone. It was unharmed. The tiny white evening star flower stared up at her, impossibly bright. She clutched it to her chest, curling her body around it, rocking slightly. But no tears came. They were frozen somewhere deep inside, locked in the same ice that was spreading through her veins. The grief was too vast, too absolute for something as simple as crying. In the deep, hidden vault of her mind, where Arya used to run and play, she felt it then. Not a whimper, not a sigh. A ripple, a single clear pulse of rage, hot and red and fierce. It was a spark in the frozen tundra of her spirit. Sienna lifted her head, her eyes dry and burning. She looked from the stone in her hand to the iron bars on the window, then to the moon, now partially obscured by a passing cloud. The gilded cage, for the first time, did not feel like a destiny. It felt like a crime scene. And the spark of Arya's rage began to melt the ice around a single crystalline thought, a thought that was hers, and hers alone. This cannot be the rest of my life. She stayed there, kneeling in the ashes, holding the last piece of her father's love, until the moon began its slow descent and the first grey hint of a joyless dawn bled into the sky. The cage was still locked, but inside the woman who knelt within it, something had just quietly broken free. The dawn after the breaking of the box arrived not with light, but with a slow grey leaching of darkness. Sienna stirred, a bone-deep ache announcing her consciousness before her mind fully engaged. She was curled on the floorboards before the cold hearth, the grit of ashes pressing into her cheek. For a disorienting moment, she was a child again, having fallen asleep by the fire after a story. Then the memory returned, not as a thought, but as a physical sensation, the violent crack of splintering wood, the hollow thud of the stone in the ashes, the spear of anguish that had impaled her chest. She uncurled her stiff fingers. The riverstone was still there, pressed so hard into her palm its painted flower had left a phantom imprint on her skin. She stared at it, the small white evening star bloom, her father's steady hand in every brushstroke. It was unharmed. It had survived the violence. The thought was a fragile, dangerous thing. Slowly, every movement and effort against gravity and grief, she pushed herself up. Her fine grey dress was smudged with soot, the hem torn where she had caught it under her knee. She didn't brush it off. The ashes felt like a badge, the only honest thing about her appearance. She had to hide it. Corbin would check. He would want to see that his lesson had been learned, that the last tether was severed. Her eyes scanned the room, this beautiful prison. The wardrobe he filled, the vanity with his gifts of combs and perfumes, the bed with its silken sheets, all were his domain under his inspection. Her gaze fell to the floor, to the wide pine planks worn smooth by time. There, beside the leg of the bed, was a board that had always sat slightly unevenly. With a quiet, desperate strength, she wedged her fingers into the narrow gap and pried it up. A small, dark hollow yawned beneath, smelling of dust and dry earth. It was a coffin for hope. Gently, she placed the painted stone inside, wrapping it once more in its soot-stained velvet. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered into the void. "Just for a little while longer." She replaced the board, pressing it down until it sat flush, hiding her heart beneath the floor. The routine began, as it always did. A heavy tread on the stairs, the rattle of a key in the lock. Boris, a bear of a man with dead eyes, entered with a tray. He said nothing, never did. He placed the tray on the table, porridge, a slice of dry toast, an apple, and stood by the door, a silent, looming escort for her meal. Sienna sat and ate, each spoonful tasteless, each chew a mechanical exercise. She kept her eyes on the wood grain of the table, her posture the perfect, slack depiction of defeat. Inside, however, a new circuit was alive. She was listening, not to Boris, but to the quiet hum of her own spirit, to the faint, unfamiliar warmth where the memory of Arya's spark of rage still glowed. She shielded it, feeding it nothing but her silent attention, a mother bird on a single precious egg. Later, under Boris's watchful eye, she took her walk. The path was a short, beaten loop just within the clearing's edge, offering a tantalizing view of the dense, untamed forest before curving cruelly back towards the cabin. Her feet knew every root, every stone. She walked with her head down, her shoulders rounded, a study in subjugation. But today her downcast eyes were not vacant. They tracked the patterns of the guards' patrols, noted the sun's position through the canopy, measured the distance to the first real cover of pines. The ember in her chest pulsed once, faintly. The disruption came in the afternoon. It began as a distant commotion, shouts, the snapping of branches, a high, panicked snarl that was unmistakably a wolf in distress. Sienna, who had been pretending to mend a dress by the window, went still, her needle poised in midair. The sounds crescendoed, moving closer to the compound. She rose and drifted to the bars, her fingers curling around the cold iron. Below, Corbin's enforcers emerged from the tree line. There were 4 of them, faces grim and exhilarated. Between them, dragged by his arms, was a boy. He was young, maybe 18, his lean body straining against their grip. His clothes, simple homespun trousers and a tunic, were ripped, revealing angry welts and bloody scratches. His tawny hair was matted with dirt and sweat, and one eye was swelling shut. But the other eye was wide, blazing with a fury so pure it was almost beautiful. He fought like a wild thing, bucking and kicking, earning him a brutal cuff to the head that made Sienna flinch. "Got a live one, Alpha!" one enforcer called out, grinning. Corbin strode from the main lodge, his presence causing the very air to still. He assessed the boy with a cold, appraising look, like a man inspecting a new horse. Sunfall markings, he mused, noting the faded green braid tied around the boy's bicep. The Alpha's line, by the look of him. Strong. "He killed Jarek's wolf," another enforcer spat. "Good," Corbin said, a faint, chilling smile touching his lips. "Spirit is useful, once it's bent to the right purpose." He nodded toward the old storage shed at the edge of the clearing, a squat, windowless structure of rotting logs. "Put him in the breaking cell. Let him cool off. We'll begin tonight." The boy's blazing eye found Sienna's then, just for a second, as they hauled him past. In that fractured glance, she didn't see a stranger, a Sunfall wolf, an enemy. She saw herself. She saw the same stunned, animal terror of her first days in this clearing, the same dawning horror that the world contained a cruelty so profound it defied understanding. She saw the stubborn, unbroken core of him, the part that still screamed, "I am!" The memory ambushed her, vivid and sensory, her own first beating. Not for an escape attempt, but for a question. She had asked Corbin if she could visit her mother's grave. The blow had come so fast she hadn't seen it, only felt the explosion of pain in her cheek and the warmer, more shocking pain of her heart shattering. It wasn't the physical hurt that had undone her, it was the look in his eyes, the absolute transactional coldness. Love had been a lie. She saw that realization now, dawning in the boy's eye, as he took in Corbin, the compound, the bars on her window, a soul recognizing its executioner. The shed door slammed shut and a heavy padlock clicked into place. The compound returned to its grim normalcy. But for Sienna, the world had tilted on its axis. That night Corbin came to her. He smelled of pine and power and the faint metallic scent of blood. He was in a state of dark exhilaration. "A prize," he announced, pouring himself a drink from her decanter without asking. Young, strong-willed, good blood. He took a sip, looking at her over the rim of the glass. "He'll be a valuable asset once he's reformed." "Reformed?" The word slipped out, flat. "Broken," Corbin clarified, his tone one of simple fact. "It's a process. You isolate the will. You show it its own uselessness. You apply pressure precisely until the spirit cracks and can be rebuilt into something stronger, loyal." He set the glass down and approached her, tilting her chin up. His thumb stroked the apple of her cheek where he had once left a bruise. "It's not cruelty, Sienna. It's alchemy, turning weak ore into steel. I saw the potential in you too. It just takes time." He was describing her life, her slow, meticulous unmaking. He said it with the pride of a sculptor. Nausea rose in her throat. The ember in her chest flared, hot and dangerous. For the next 2 days, Sienna became a ghost in her gilded cage, but her senses were stretched taut, absorbing everything. She heard the sounds from the shed, muffled thuds, low growls, sometimes a choked-off cry that was more devastating than a scream. She saw the enforcers come and go, their knuckles raw, their expressions bored or amused. She was made to walk her loop, and once, as Boris argued with another guard about rations, her path took her within 3 feet of the shed. A sliver of light from a crack in the logs fell across her hand, and in that crack an eye appeared, swollen, bloodshot, but fiercely aware. It fixed on her. Time stopped. In that silent, breathless communion, a pact was forged. No words, no promises, just a shared, desperate truth. "I see you. We are here." She gave the faintest, almost imperceptible nod. The eye blinked once, slowly, and vanished. That night sleep was impossible. She sat by her window, the moon a cold spectator. The ember was no longer a spark, it was a knot of fiery resolve in her gut. And Aria was stirring, not with words but with sensations. A low, protective rumble vibrated in the depths of her mind, a primal urge to shield the pup. Her wolf, the essence of her strength, was not just angry, she was awakening to a purpose beyond mere survival. The plan formed not from intricate strategy, but from a visceral maternal imperative. She could not save herself, not yet. The cage was too strong, the chain of the bond too heavy. But she could do this. She would not let another soul be unmade on the anvil of Corbin's will. She would not be a bystander to her own story. She waited for the hour before dawn, when the night was at its coldest and deepest, and the guard change was a sluggish, grumbling affair. From a hidden seam in her mattress, she withdrew her only tool, a simple hairpin, its end filed to a point long ago during a fleeting season of hope. Her hands, which had trembled for years, were now perfectly steady. The lock on her door was a statement of contempt, simple, heavy, but mechanical. Corbin never believed she had the will to try or the skill to succeed. But the pin found the tumbler. A twist, a delicate pressure, a listening with her fingertips. A click, softer than a heartbeat. The door sighed inward an inch. The corridor was a canyon of shadows. She moved like one of them, a wisp of grey in the gloom, her bare feet silent on the worn wood. The main room below echoed with the snores of sleeping rogues. The front door was bolted and guarded. But the back kitchen door, used for taking out trash, had a simpler latch. The cold night air hit her like a slap, shocking her senses to a razor's edge. She hugged the wall of the cabin, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The shed was 20 paces across open ground, illuminated by a single guttering torch. This was the moment. This was the point of no return. She darted, a streak of pale grey closing the distance in a breathless rush. At the shed door, she fumbled with the padlock. It was larger, rougher. The hairpin felt absurdly flimsy. Focus. You are the daughter of Aluna. You are Arya's human half. You can do this. A prayer, not to the moon, but to her own forgotten strength. A scrape, a probe. Click. The hasp sprang open. She slid into the dank, dark interior, the stench of blood, sweat, and despair thick in the air. The boy was chained to a post in the centre. He looked up, his good eye widening in shock that quickly hardened into suspicion. He pulled against his bonds, a growl forming in his throat. "Shh," she breathed, the first sound she'd made. She knelt before him, her fingers working at the crude iron manacles. They were fastened with a simple pin. She pulled it, and his hands were free. He stared at his raw, liberated wrists, then back at her, confusion warring with desperate hope. She pressed a small, wrapped bundle into his hands, the hard bread and cheese from her dinner tray, and from a tiny pocket sewn into her sleeve, a single dried petal of a silvery moonflower. Anya's long-ago gift, her voice echoing. It confuses the nose, child. Makes your scent trail blur like ink in water. She pointed urgently to the east, toward the thickest part of the forest, away from the main trails and patrols. She leaned in, her lips almost touching his ear, and poured every ounce of her will into a single soundless word. Run. He hesitated, his eyes searching her face, the hollows under her eyes, the old fear etched beside the new determination. He saw not a Luna of this terrible place, but a fellow captive, a comrade. His grimy, blood-caked hand shot out and seized hers, squeezing with a strength that spoke of gratitude, fury, and a promise. Then he was gone, slipping into the forest like a phantom, swallowed by the darkness from which he'd come. Sienna stayed for a count of 10, listening to the silence. Then she repinned the manacles, closed the padlock, and retraced her steps, a ghost returning to its grave. She was back in her room, the door relocked, the hairpin hidden, her body tucked into bed, when the first hint of true dawn paled the sky. The discovery, when it came, was not a surprise. It was an earthquake, an enforcer's shout, sharp with alarm, running boots. Then a sound that froze the very blood in Sienna's veins, a roar of such primal, unadulterated fury that it seemed to shake the cabin to its foundations. It was not Corbin's voice, it was the voice of Kratos, his wolf, a sound of betrayal so profound it transcended humanity. She sat up in bed, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. She was calm. She had done the one right thing. The door did not open. It exploded, wood splintered, the lock shearing clean off. Corbin filled the doorway, but he was not a man. His eyes blazed with pure amber light, his features contorted in a snarl, elongated canines pressing against his lip. The mate bond between them, usually a dull, painful throb, was now a conduit for a black, boiling tsunami of rage. It flooded her, a psychic assault that made her gasp, her vision swimming. You! The word was a guttural animal noise. He knew. He could smell the truth on her, the scent of her interference lingering in the air like a confession. He crossed the room. There was no question, no theatrical accusation. Her act of mercy was an indictment he would answer in the only language he respected. The first blow was a backhand that caught her across the mouth as she tried to stand. The world spun, a metallic tang flooding her tongue. She crashed into the small table, sending her breakfast tray clattering to the floor. He hauled her up by her hair, the pain a bright, searing line across her scalp. His face was inches from hers, his breath hot with the scent of his wolf. "You think you can steal from me?" he snarled, each word a punch of sound. "You think you have a will that is not mine? You are a vessel, Sienna, empty, and I decide what fills you." He threw her. She hit the wall beside the hearth, the impact driving the air from her lungs with a sickening whump. Before she could slide down, he was on her, his fist driving into her side. A sharp, wet crack echoed in the small room. A rib, pain, white and blinding, exploded through her. She crumpled to the floor, curling instinctively around the injury. The blows fell like rain, a kick to her thigh, a knee driving into her stomach, making her retch. He was methodical, avoiding her face, targeting the places that would hurt the most, would incapacitate, would scream the lesson into her flesh without leaving a mark the world could see. The world narrowed to the rhythm of pain, the impact, the burst of agony, the gasp for air, the next impact. She retreated. Not into unconsciousness. She clung to consciousness with a fierce, new stubbornness, but inward. She fled from the breaking body on the floor and dove into the frozen, silent landscape of her own mind, the place where Arya had been hiding for years. She expected to find a cowering, whimpering creature. She expected to share this pain with her wolf and find only shared despair. What she found instead stopped her internal flight cold. In the centre of that inner wilderness, Arya stood. Her wolf was not cowering. She was braced, four-square, her silver-grey fur standing on end, her lips peeled back from teeth that gleamed with a fierce, silent light. Her golden eyes, so long dulled, blazed with a fire that mirrored the amber in Corbin's, but where his was fire of destruction, hers was the fire of forge. The spark had not gone out. It had become an inferno contained within the slender, powerful form of her spirit. And as Corbin delivered a final brutal kick to her already shattered side, Sienna, from the depths of her spirit, did not feel Arya whimper in shared, helpless agony. She felt her snarl. It was a soundless, tectonic vibration that originated in the core of her being and shook through every fractured part of her. It was not a response to pain. It was a declaration of war. It was a reclamation. "This is my body. This is my soul. This ends. Now!" The physical beating stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Corbin stood over her, breathing heavily, his human features slowly reasserting themselves over the wolfish distortion. He looked down at her curled, trembling form, at the silent tears of pure physiological shock leaking from her eyes. He saw what he needed to see, absolute physical defeat. "Let this," he panted, wiping a fleck of spittle from his lip, "be the lesson that finally takes root in that stubborn mind of yours. You are not a person. You are not a Luna. You are mine. A possession. Remember that." He leaned down, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Or next time, I will not bother with my hands. I will let Kratos teach you what true breaking feels like." He straightened, adjusted his tunic, and walked out, stepping over the splintered wreckage of her door. Alone in the ringing silence, pain radiating from a dozen points in a map of her punishment, Sienna lay on the cold floor. The taste of blood was in her mouth. Each breath was a knife in her side. But in the quiet centre of the storm, where Arya stood snarling, a new truth was born, solid and unbreakable. She moved her hand just an inch and pressed her palm flat against the floorboards, directly over the hidden hollow where her father's stone lay. A silent vow, spoken not to the moon, but to the wolf inside her and to the boy fleeing east. Never again. I am leaving this place, or I will die trying. The hours after the beating were a hazy, pain-racked limbo. Sienna lay on the floor where Corbin had left her, the cold seeping from the boards into her bones, a counterpoint to the feverish, throbbing agony in her side. Each shallow breath was a victory, each deeper attempt a punishment that made white stars burst behind her eyelids. The taste of copper was a constant in her mouth. She did not weep. The tears that had leaked out were from shock, not sorrow. Sorrow was a luxury for a life with a future. She had passed into something else. Mercifully, no one came. The shattered door was a sufficient warning to the rest of the pack. The Alpha's displeasure was a private, terrifying thing, and the compound gave his cabin a wide, silent berth. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, Sienna finally stirred. Moving was an act of sheer, dogged will. She pushed herself up onto her elbows, a groan tearing from her lips as the fractured ribs screamed in protest. Her vision swam, darkened at the edges, but she clung to consciousness. Arya was there, a steady, snarling presence in her mind, lending a thread of fierce energy to her human form's broken vessel. She crawled, across the floor, past the overturned table, to the bed. Using the post, she hauled herself upright, black spots dancing before her eyes. Every movement was a calculated, agonizing negotiation. She shuffled to the wash basin, the water within long gone cold. With trembling hands, she splashed her face, washing away the blood from her split lip, the grit from the floor. The face in the tarnished mirror was a stranger's, pale as parchment, dark hollows under eyes that held not defeat, but a cold, gem-like focus. The face of a woman with nothing left to lose. Tonight. The decision was absolute. Corbin would come again. There would be an interrogation about the Sunfall boy, or worse, a visit from Kratos to ensure the lesson had taken. Waiting meant her body would stiffen, her resolve might waver. It meant another round of agony. It meant death, slow or fast. She had no pack to run to. Her father's pack, Fallow Glen, was gone, scattered or absorbed after Corbin's first brutal conquest. She had no allies here. She had only the fading memory of Anya's off-grid cabin, a week's hard journey to the northwest, and the desperate, directional pull of the moonflower petal she'd given the boy. A pull east, a false trail she hoped would buy her time. Her preparations were pitiful. She changed from her torn, ashen dress into dark, sturdy trousers and a tunic she'd worn for mending, clothes of no value beneath Corbin's notice. She retrieved the painted stone from its hollow, its smooth surface the only warmth in the room. She tied it in a strip of velvet and secured it against her skin, under her clothes. A talisman. A promise. From a hidden seam in the mattress, she took the hairpin and a small, sharp kitchen knife she'd palmed months ago and never had the courage to use. They felt laughably inadequate. She took no food, no water skin. To linger was to die. She waited for the moon to rise, a sliver of cold silver in the vast black. The witching hour, when even monsters slept deepest. The pain in her side was a constant, grinding companion, but she breathed into it, made it a part of her, a fuel for her fury. The lock on her shattered door was meaningless. She slipped into the hallway, a shadow among shadows. The main room below was deserted, the fire banked to embers, the front door was bolted and guarded outside. But the kitchen, the small greasy window above the wash basin, was latched, not locked. It was meant as a vent, not an exit. It would be a tight fit. She dragged a stool over, each scrape of wood on stone sounding like a thunderclap in the silence. She climbed, biting back a cry as her ribs shrieked in protest. The latch was stiff with grime. She worked it with the knife, her breath coming in short, pained gasps. Click. She pushed the window open, a rush of cold, free air washing over her face. The opening was small, square, barely wider than her shoulders. This was the first true test. To get stuck here would be a punchline to a tragic joke. She wriggled through headfirst, her injured side scraping agonizingly against the rough frame. For a heart-stopping second, she was wedged, panic clawing at her throat. Then she pushed with her feet, a final desperate shove, and tumbled out into the damp night. She landed in a heap on the soft, rotten compost beside the cabin wall. The impact jarred her entire body, and she had to press her face into the cold earth to stifle a scream. She lay there, listening. Only the sigh of the wind in the pines, no alarm, no shout. Go, now. She pushed herself up and ran. Or rather, she stumbled, lurched, and half-crawled toward the tree line, a broken marionette jerked along by a single unbreakable thread of will. Every footfall sent lightning bolts of pain up her side. Her breath soared in and out of her lungs, ragged and wet-sounding. The dark forest, which had seemed so tauntingly close from her window, now felt miles away. She reached the first sentinel pines and collapsed against one, her forehead pressed to the rough bark. She was out. She was in the woods. but she was a wounded animal leaving a trail of blood and agony a blind pup could follow. Arya surged forward then, not with words, but with instinct. Sienna felt her senses sharpen, blur, then refocus through the wolf's perception. The world became a tapestry of scent and sound. The damp rot of the forest floor, the sharp tang of pine, the distant musk of a deer, the fainter, hated scent of rogue and wood smoke from the cabin, and her own scent, fear, pain, blood, a neon beacon screaming here. Hide it, Arya's instinct whispered. Become the forest. Sienna pushed off the tree and moved, not with human logic, but with the wolf's cunning. She found a patch of wild mint and crushed the leaves, rubbing the pungent oil over her arms, her neck, her clothes. She stepped into a shallow, icy creek that trickled eastward and forced herself to walk in it for 50 paces, the freezing water biting through her boots, the current trying to pull her off her feet. It would confuse her trail, if only for a little while. The mate bond was a living torture. It was no longer just a dull ache or a conduit for rage. It was a physical tether, a barbed hook lodged in her soul, and with every step away from Corbin, it pulled taut. A sickening psychic nausea washed over her, a primal wrongness that screamed at her to turn back, to return to her alpha, to her place. It was a siren song of subjugation, and its melody was written in her very blood. She clutched a tree, dry heaving, cold sweat beading on her skin. Lies, Arya snarled within her, the sound a bastion against the pull. It is a chain, bite through it. She pushed on, the forest becoming a dark, indistinguishable blur of pain and determination. She had no sense of time, only distance measured in lances of agony. The moon played hide-and-seek behind scudding clouds, plunging her into pitch blackness one moment, bathing her in treacherous silver light the next. The wind began to rise, whispering through the branches, soon building to a mournful howl that masked her stumbling progress, but also whipped the trees into a frenzy, showering her with needles and dead twigs. Then came the rain. It started as a cold mist, then became a relentless, icy downpour. It soaked her to the skin in minutes, plastering her hair to her face, leaching the last vestiges of warmth from her body. The forest floor turned to a slippery slurry of mud and leaves. She fell, again and again, each time a fresh explosion of torment from her ribs. Mud filled her mouth, her nose. She was a creature of earth and pain, crawling through a freezing hell. The storm was her salvation and her curse. It would wash away her scent, her footprints. But it also sapped her strength, hypothermia, a silent, creeping predator, alongside the very real one she knew was coming. Dawn was a grey smudge on the horizon when she heard it. It was not a sound born on the wind. It was a vibration that travelled up through the soles of her feet, through the marrow of her bones, and erupted in the core of the mate bond with the force of a detonation. A howl. It was miles away, but its power was undiminished by distance. It was Corbin's voice, but it was Kratos unleashed, a sound of such pure, unadulterated fury that it seemed to split the world in two. It was not a call, it was a declaration of hunting, a promise of rending flesh and snapping bone. It held her name in its syllables, a curse sung to the storm. He knew she was gone. The hunt had begun. Terror, colder than the rain, colder than death, locked her muscles. Every instinct shrieked to freeze, to hide, to make herself small. The bond yanked at her so violently she almost turned and started running back toward it. Arya erupted. A snarl, real and visceral, tore from Sienna's human throat, a raw, ragged sound lost in the wind. Her wolf's fury was a firestorm, burning away the paralysing fear. "Run!" the fury commanded. "Run or die here." She scrambled forward, her body moving on autopilot, fueled by primal terror. The terrain began to slope downward. The sound of water grew from a whisper to a roar. She burst through a final wall of dripping ferns and stumbled onto the bank of the Blackwater River. It was a torrent, swollen by the storm, a churning, foam-flecked monster of dark water. Its far bank was a vague, grey shape in the rain and dawn mist. It was suicide. The current would dash her against rocks. The cold would stop her heart in minutes. She looked back the way she had come. In the deep shadows of the forest, she saw a flicker of movement. A darker shadow among the trees, moving with swift, predatory grace. Too fast for a man on foot, he had shifted. The choice was gone. The howl came again, closer now, vibrating in her teeth. It was answered by others, the voices of his enforcers, fanning out, closing the net. Sienna turned to the raging river. The mate bond was a white-hot brand in her chest, pulling her back toward the beast in the woods. She looked at the water, then at the stone she clutched in her hand, her father's painted flower blurred by rain. "For Papa," she whispered, her voice lost to the river's roar. "For me." She didn't jump. She let herself fall forward into the greedy, freezing maw of the black water. The cold was an impact, a shock so total it stopped her heart for a beat. The world vanished into a roaring, tumbling chaos of dark water and violent force. She was ragdolled, spun, pulled under. Water forced itself into her nose, her mouth. Her injured side slammed against a submerged log, and the pain was a bright final sun before an eclipse. The current seized her, claiming her. As the darkness at the edges of her vision surged inward, as her lungs burned for air they would never find, her last conscious thought was not a prayer, but a plea to the wolf within, a final thread of connection in the void. "Stay with me, Arya. Don't let go." Then the world was gone, swallowed by the black, blood warmth of the river and the fading, furious echo of a hunter's howl. There was no up, no down, only a deafening cold roar and a body that was not hers own, but a thing of pain and rushing water. The Blackwater River did not carry Sienna. It dismantled her. It was a millstone, grinding her against rock and root, stripping away thought, memory, hope. The world was a bruise-coloured chaos of churning foam and violent force. Her lungs were sacks of fire, her ribs a cage of shattered glass. She fought, a single, wild instinct to breach the surface, but the current was stronger, an indifferent god toying with a broken doll. "Stay with me." The plea was a fading echo in the dark chapel of her mind. There was no answer from Arya. The wolf was gone, or buried so deep under the onslaught of cold and agony that she was indistinguishable from the void. The mate bond, that barbed hook in her soul, was a distant, muted throb, drowned by the river's greater fury. She was dying. The knowledge was a cold, flat stone in the centre of the storm. She had escaped the cage only to be delivered to the river's cold, anonymous grave. Her father's painted stone was a lead weight in her fist, pulling her down. "I'm sorry," she thought, the words dissolving into water. "I tried." Her body slammed into something massive and unyielding, a boulder midstream. The impact was a final merciful punctuation. A bright white star exploded behind her eyes, and then the darkness was no longer water, but absolute. Consciousness returned in fragments, like shards of a broken mirror reflecting only pain. A searing heat on one side of her body, an aching frozen numbness on the other. The rough scrape of wool against her cheek, a smell, wood smoke, drying herbs, wet earth, and something pungently green. A low, crackling sound. Fire. She was not dead. The realization brought no relief, only a fresh wave of terror. Corbin, had he found her? Was this his idea of a sick lesson to revive her only to break her again? She tried to move, to open her eyes. A groan, raw and pathetic, escaped her lips. Every part of her was a separate country of agony, but her left side, her ribs, was a blazing capital of pain. "Don't," a voice said. It was not Corbin's. It was not a man's voice at all. It was a woman's, low, raspy with age and disuse, but devoid of malice. It was the sound of stone smoothed by a river. Sienna forced her eyelids open. The world was a blur of ochre and shadow. She was lying on a low, rough-hewn cot piled with furs, tucked against a stone fireplace where a small, fierce fire danced. The room was a single, circular space, walls made of intertwined logs and mud, hung with drying bundles of herbs, roots, and strange, twisted fungi. The air was thick, warm, and smelled profoundly of the forest, its life and its decay. A figure moved into her limited line of sight, an old woman. Her hair was a wild cloud of iron grey, streaked with white, escaping a loose braid. Her face was a topography of deep lines, etched by sun and solitude. But her eyes were a clear, sharp hazel, the colour of a forest pool kite, seeing everything. She wore layers of patched and faded wool, and she moved with a silent, economical grace that spoke of a life lived in harmony with quiet things. The woman knelt beside the cot, bringing with her the smell of crushed pine and rosemary. She held a wooden cup. "Drink. Slowly." Sienna's instinct was to flinch, to recoil. Trust was a foreign currency, long devalued. But the woman made no move to force her. She simply waited, her gaze steady, holding the cup. Her hands, Sienna noted, were strong and scarred, but they held the vessel gently. Thirst, a desert in her throat, overrode fear. Sienna let the woman help her lift her head, a movement that made stars burst in her vision, and sip. The liquid was warm, bitter, and deeply herbal, with an underlying sweetness of honey. It traced a path of heat down her raw throat and into her stomach, a small anchor in the sea of her pain. Where? Sienna's voice was a rusted hinge. Where am I? Who are you? You're in a place that isn't on any pack map, the woman said, setting the cup aside. She began to examine the crude bandage wrapped around Sienna's torso without touching it. As for who I am, you can call me Anya. Anya. The name was a distant bell, ringing in the deepest well of Sienna's memory. The moonflower. The old she-wolf who lived off-grid, who her mother had once spoken of in hushed, respectful tones. The crafter. A myth. A story told to pups. You're real! Sienna breathed. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Anya's weathered lips. More real than most things, I'd wager. The river thought you were for it. Spat you up on my bend like a piece of driftwood. You've been out for 2 days. 2 days. The panic returned, sharp and sour. Corbin. The hunt. He'll be looking. He'll find the scent. The Black Water is a jealous keeper of secrets, Anya interrupted calmly, her hands now gently probing Sienna's swollen ankle. Carried you a long way from where you went in, and the storm washed the world clean. Your trail ended at the riverbank. If your alpha is looking, he's looking downstream. She paused, her sharp eyes meeting Sienna's. But he is not the only danger. Fever is. A punctured lung is. You have 2 broken ribs, child. One is poorly positioned. The clinical assessment, delivered without pity or alarm, was more grounding than any reassurance. Sienna was not a victim here. She was a patient, a problem to be solved. It was a strange, profound relief. Anya stood and moved to a cluttered shelf, selecting jars and pouches. The wound is the shelter now, she said, almost to herself. The body's fury is its own fortress. We must work with it, not against it. As Anya worked, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, Sienna's mind, freed from the immediate terror of pursuit, began to unravel. The warmth, the safety, however temporary, was a key turning in a lock held fast for years. The dam broke, the fever rose like a tide, and with it came the ghosts. She was back in the mate bonding ceremony, the bonfire painting Corbin's face in gold and shadow. His hand was warm, his smile dazzling. The bond snapped into place, a cord of golden light, and Arya howled with joy inside her. The feeling was ecstasy, completion, a homecoming she had dreamed of since she was a girl. She felt his strength, his ambition, his possessive love like a warm cloak around her shoulders. My Luna, he whispered into her mind, his mental voice a caress. My everything. The memory shimmered, then twisted. The gold cord began to tarnish, to grow barbs. His ambition became a cold, hard thing. His possessive love became a grip that tightened with every breath she took. The first time he corrected her in front of his betas, his hand on her arm just a shade too tight. The first time he locked a door. The first time his eyes flashed amber, not in passion, but in warning. The golden joy curdled slowly, so slowly she told herself she was imagining it, until the day she wasn't. And it was too late. She cried out, a weak, thready sound thrashing on the cot. It was real first. Anya's cool hands were on her forehead, her wrists. Hush now, the past is a ghost. Let it speak, but do not let it hold you. Another ghost rose. Her father, Alastair, painting the stone by firelight, his big hands surprisingly delicate. For when the night seems too dark, little moon. Then her mother, Alara, brushing her hair, singing the old Luna's hymn to the setting sun. The safe, sun-dappled chaos of the Fallow Glen packyard, the smell of her mother's bread, all of it gone, reduced to smoke and screams and the triumphant howl of Kratos. Corbin standing amid the ruins, his hand extended to her, blood on his knuckles. Come, Sienna, your old life is over, your new one begins. She moaned, the loss a fresh wound, more painful than the broken bones. They're gone, she sobbed, her body convulsing with grief and fever. Everyone's gone. Anya did not offer empty comfort. She simply held a cup of a different, more pungent tea to Sienna's lips. Drink this, it will help you sleep. The ghosts will still be there, but they will be quieter. The tea was like swallowing a forest floor, dark, earthy, and potent. The visions softened, blurred at the edges. She felt herself sinking, not into the cold black of the river, but into a soft, deep moss. The last thing she was aware of was Anya's voice, a low murmur in the firelit dark. The river gives and the river takes. It took your strength, but it gave you to me. Sleep, little lost one, the shelter is strong. When Sienna woke again, it was to a profound and utter stillness. The fever had broken. The pain in her side was still a deep, grinding presence. But it was no longer a raging fire. It was a banked coal, manageable. Weak golden sunlight filtered through the single high window of the roundhouse, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. She was alone. She lay still, listening. The crackle of the fire, the distant call of a jay, the sound of her own breath easier now. The silence was not empty. It was full. Peaceful. It was the silence of a place unhurried by pack politics, untroubled by dominance displays. It was the first true silence she had known in years. She turned her head slowly. On a stool beside the cot sat a wooden bowl of clear broth, a spoon resting beside it, and a cup of water. The simple, undemanding kindness of it brought a prickling heat to her eyes. No one had left her food without strings, without a price to be paid in submission or fear since she was a child. Tentatively, she pushed herself up on her elbows. The movement was stiff, painful, but possible. She drank the water first, then sipped the broth. It was rich with the flavour of wild mushrooms and roots, nourishing in a way that reached deeper than her stomach. The door, a heavy slab of wood reinforced with hide, opened and Anya entered, carrying an armful of fresh firewood. She saw Sienna awake and gave a small approving nod. "You've met the ghosts and survived," Anya said, stacking the wood neatly by the hearth. "A good sign." "How long?" Sienna asked. Her voice still weak but clearer. 4 days since the river gave you up. The fever ruled for 3. Anya came over, her sharp eyes assessing. She placed a hand on Sienna's forehead, then gently checked the binding on her ribs. "The bone is settling. Your body is a fighter. Your wolf. She is resting. Healing takes all the energy." "Arya," Sienna whispered the name, testing it. She reached for the wolf inside, the snarling, fiery presence from the cabin. She found only a deep, warm lethargy, a sense of burrowed safety. The snarl was gone, replaced by a weary, watchful calm. "She's quiet." "As she should be," Anya said. "You both need to remember what quiet feels like." Anya helped her sit up more fully, propping her with furs. As the older woman moved about the roundhouse, preparing more tea, Sienna watched her. She moved with a sure, unhurried purpose, every action efficient, every object in its place. This was not a temporary camp. This was a life crafted with intention, far from the howling and posturing of pack life. "Why?" Sienna asked suddenly. "Why help me? You don't know me. I could bring death to your door." Anya paused, her back to Sienna as she tended the fire. "The forest provides," she said simply, "and it asks for care in return. I found a broken creature on my shore. To turn away would be to violate an older law than any pack's." She turned, her hazel eyes catching the firelight. "And I knew your mother. A long time ago, she had a gentle heart. I see it, buried under the fear in you." The mention of her mother from this stranger in the woods was a gift so unexpected it stole Sienna's breath. It was a thread connecting her to the person she was before the cage, a thread she thought had been severed forever. Tears, hot and silent, spilled down her cheeks, not the tears of pain or terror, but the first, slow thaw of a frozen grief. She cried for her parents, for her stolen joy, for the years lost, for the woman she might have been. She cried silently, her shoulders shaking. Anya did not come to comfort her. She did not tell her to hush. She simply placed a fresh cup of the honeyed herbal tea on the stool beside her and went back to her work, giving Sienna the dignity of her sorrow. As the tears subsided, leaving her hollowed out but cleaner, Sienna looked around the roundhouse, the herbs, the fire, the sturdy, simple safety of it. The wound in her side was indeed her shelter. Her broken body had led her here to this silence, this kindness, this fragile, impossible chance. She looked at Anya, who was now grinding something that smelled of cedar and sage. "Thank you," Sienna whispered, the words utterly inadequate. Anya met her gaze and gave a single, slow nod. "The thanks is in the healing," she said. "Now rest. The quiet is your medicine. Drink it in." The silence was the loudest thing Sienna had ever heard. In the roundhouse, with only the crackle of the fire and Anya's soft, purposeful movements, there were no shouted orders, no brawling laughter, no heavy boots on wood, no low, threatening growls, no Corbin. The absence of him was a physical space in the air, a vacuum where terror had once lived. In the first few days of true wakefulness, she kept flinching, waiting for the other boot to drop, for the peace to shatter. It never did. The quiet left a void, and into that void rushed the ghosts. They didn't come as fever dreams now. They came as memories, sharp and unbidden, triggered by nothing at all. Anya handed her a wooden spoon to stir a pot of stew, and the smooth, worn feel of the handle in her palm was suddenly her father's hand, guiding hers as they carved a toy wolf for a pack pup. The memory was so vivid she could smell the fresh-cut pine and the oil they used to seal it. The ghost of his smile, his patient voice, wrapped around her heart and squeezed until she couldn't breathe. She dropped the spoon, the clatter against the stone hearth startling her back to the present. Anya said nothing, simply retrieved it, wiped it, and handed it back. Later, the wind sighed through the chinks in the roundhouse wall, a low, mournful sound. In an instant, Sienna was back in her cage room, listening to the same wind, but there it had been a taunt, a reminder of the free world just beyond her bars. The memory brought with it the phantom scent of Corbin's cologne and the cold dread that always accompanied his footsteps on the stairs. Her chest tightened, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She had to sit down, pressing her back against the solid wall, grounding herself in the here. The smell of herbs, the warmth of the fire, the safety of locked door that was meant to keep the world out, not her in. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget, Anya said quietly from where she sat mending a hide. It is not a weakness. It is a reckoning. The reckoning was relentless. The guilt was the heaviest ghost. It came at night, when the fire burned low. She would see the faces of those she'd left behind in Corbin's compound, the cowed she-wolves who averted their eyes, the injured enforcers who followed him out of fear, the young ones being raised on his poison. Did the Sunfall boy make it? She would wonder, a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Or did they catch him because of my hesitation? She saw the young captive's eye in the crack of the shed, the furious hope in it. She had saved one. She had abandoned countless others to their fate. The title of Luna she'd worn felt like a brand of shame. A true Luna protected her pack. She had fled hers. One afternoon, as she was slowly, painfully sweeping the hard-packed earth floor with a birch twig broom, a sunbeam broke through the high window and fell in a perfect, dust-moted column onto the floor. It was the same angle, the same quality of light that used to fall across her mother's loom in Fallow Glen. The memory ambushed her with such force she stumbled, the broom clattering from her hands. She saw her mother's fingers, flecked with dye, flying over the threads, heard her humming the weaving song, smelled the lavender she kept in bowls around the room. The grief that followed was not a storm, but a collapse. It folded her in half where she stood, silent sobs racking her healing ribs. She cried for the mother whose grave she could never visit, for the songs no one would ever sing again, for the warmth of a home that existed now only in fragments of memory. She cried until she was empty. Anya found her there, curled on the floor in the patch of sun. She didn't scoop her up or offer platitudes. She sat down on the floor beside her, her back against the wall, and waited. When the sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths, Anya spoke, her voice as dry and steady as the herbs hanging from her rafters. I had a mate once, she said, gazing into the fire, and a pack, a daughter. Sienna went still, listening through her tears. The Red Tooth pack came. They wanted our territory, our hunting grounds. My mate, he was a peacemaker. He went to parley. Anya's voice didn't waver, but it grew flatter, older. They killed him at the treaty stone, as a message. I took my daughter and ran. We lived in the deep woods for a winter. She caught a cough, the kind that settles in the lungs and turns them to stone. She paused, the memory a weight in the quiet room. I knew every herb, every healing chant. None of it mattered. She died in my arms as the first thaw came. The stark, unadorned horror of it cut through Sienna's own grief. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Anya nodded, acknowledging the sentiment, but not held by it. For years I was a ghost like you, haunted by his smile, by the sound of her laughter, by the what-ifs. What if I had fought? What if I had found a different route? The guilt was a wolf chewing on my bones. She turned her clear hazel eyes to Sienna. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's not about the ghosts leaving. It's about learning to carry them. You make a place for them. You acknowledge their weight, and then you keep walking because they are a part of the path, not the end of it. How? Sienna's voice was small. The guilt. The things I didn't do. You did the one thing you could, Anya said firmly. You saved yourself. In a world that sought to grind you into nothing, you preserved a spark. That is not a failure. It is the first and most essential act of rebellion. You cannot pour from an empty cup, child. You cannot save others from a cage if you are still inside it. The words were a balm, but the wound was deep. The ghosts did not vanish, but that evening, as Anya prepared their meagre supper, Sienna did something she hadn't done since arriving. She reached for Arya. Her wolf had been a distant, sleeping presence, a warmth at the core of her being. Sienna reached inward, not with a command, but with a question. A tentative brush of consciousness against the soft, furred mind of her other half. Arya? There was no snarl, no blazing fury, but there was awareness. A sense of a large silver head lifting, golden eyes opening in the dark, a feeling of profound exhaustion, and beneath it, a deep, simmering sorrow that mirrored Sienna's own. Her wolf was not just angry at their captivity, she was mourning it. Mourning the years of hunts not run, of moons not howled at, of a bond that had become a prison. The shared grief was a new kind of connection, more intimate than the rage had been. "We're safe here," Sienna thought toward her, a slow, heavy blink of acknowledgement. Not joy. Not yet, but acknowledgement. The ghost of the wolf she had been was also present, and she, too, was grieving. The next morning, Anya handed Sienna a small clay pot filled with rich, dark soil. In her other hand, she held a single, small, hard seed. "The world takes," Anya said, "but it also gives. It is the cycle. You have known too much taking. It is time to practice giving, even if only to the earth." Sienna took the pot and the seed, her fingers clumsy. "What is it?" "Evening star," Anya said simply. Sienna's breath hitched, the flower on her father's stone, the symbol of her lost pack, of her lost family. She looked at Anya, questions in her eyes. "The forest provides reminders too," Anya said with a faint smile. "It remembers what packs forget." With great care, Sienna used a finger to make a small hole in the soil. She placed the seed inside and covered it gently, patting the earth smooth. She carried the pot to the spot by the high window where the sun lingered longest. She set it down with a reverence she hadn't felt in years. It was a tiny, foolish act. A seed might not sprout. A flower in a pot could not replace a lost pack, a stolen life. But as she looked at the dark soil, something shifted inside her. The guilt, the grief, the ghosts, they were not gone, they were heavy stones in her pockets. But the act of planting the seed felt like laying down one stone, just one, and picking up something else instead. A tiny, fragile responsibility. A pact with the future. She was not the Luna of Fallow Glen. She was not the Luna of Corbin's rogue pack. She was Sienna, broken and healing, sitting in a roundhouse in the silent woods, and she had planted a seed. It was not a victory. It was a beginning. And for the first time since the river had spat her out, the silence didn't feel like a void waiting to be filled with terror. It felt like a space where something, however small, might finally grow. The ghosts whispered, but they no longer screamed. And in the quiet between their whispers, Sienna thought she heard very faintly the sound of her own heart, beating a slow, steady rhythm toward an unknown dawn. The evening star seed became Sienna's clock. Each morning, her first act was to creep to the sunlit window and check the dark soil for a hint of green. None came. The lack of change was, perversely, a comfort. In this hidden place, time moved at the pace of roots and rain, not at the violent tempo of Corbin's world. Her body, too, was a slow-growing thing. The sharp agony in her ribs subsided into a persistent, bearable ache. She could breathe deeply again without seeing stars. She could help Anya with more tasks, grinding dried herbs into powders, sorting roots, weaving simple reed baskets. Her hands, which had known only idleness or fear, were learning purpose. Arya was changing too. The wolf was no longer a dormant, grieving presence. She was a quiet observer, peering out from behind Sienna's eyes. When Sienna sorted valerian root, known for its calming sleep, Arya's senses would sharpen, picking out the subtle, earthy scent from the dozen others in the roundhouse. When a hawk's shadow passed over the smoke hole, Arya's instincts would prickle a warning up Sienna's spine a second before Sienna herself saw it. They were integrating, not through dominance, but through a slow, careful collaboration. The snarl was still there, but it was banked, a weapon being cleaned and oiled, not waved in the air. Anya taught her the language of the forest. Not just the herbs, but the signs, the way moss grew thickest on the north side of trees, the meaning behind different bird calls, the jay's shriek of alarm, the chickadees all clear. She showed Sienna how to move through the undergrowth without snapping a twig, how to step on stone and root instead of soft earth to leave less trace. These were not just survival skills, they were lessons in becoming part of the silence, in wearing the woods like a second skin. "You cannot hide from a determined tracker forever," Anya said one afternoon as they gathered cattail roots at the edge of a still pond. "But you can make the forest your ally. You can learn to be a ghost in it." Sienna nodded, her fingers digging in the cold mud. She was becoming a ghost. The pampered Luna, the broken captive, those women were receding. Here she was something leaner, quieter. But the cost of this sanctuary was a constant low hum of anxiety. Every unusual sound, a distant tree fall, the howl of a true wild wolf made her freeze, her heart leaping into her throat. The peace was real, but it was thin, stretched over a chasm of what-ifs. The what-if arrived on the 7th day after the planting of the seed. They were farther from the roundhouse than usual, in a rocky gully where Anya knew a patch of rare, blue-starred lungwort grew. The air was cool and damp, smelling of wet stone and damp fern. Sienna was on her knees, carefully extracting a plant with its root ball intact, her mind focused on the task. Anya was a few yards away, her own movements still and watchful. It was Arya who sounded the alarm first. A jolt of pure, undiluted adrenaline shot through Sienna's system, a silent snarl reverberating in her skull. Her head snapped up, her nostrils flaring. Anya was already looking at her, a finger to her lips, her body coiled and ready. Then Sienna heard it. Not a sound, but a smell. Carried on a wayward breeze from the south, it wafted into the gully, the distinct, musky, unwashed scent of rogue wolf. Underlaid with pine and aggression, it was different from Corbin's specific hated signature, but it was unmistakably from his world. It was the smell of the enforcers, of the compound, of violence. Her blood turned to ice water. Every muscle locked. The lungwort fell from her nerveless fingers. Not here, not here. The logical part of her brain knew a single scout, downwind, might not have caught their scent yet. But logic was drowned in the tidal wave of memory. The scent was a key that unlocked a prison of fear. Her vision tunneled. The damp rocks of the gully walls became the log walls of the compound. The rustle of leaves became the shuffle of guards. Her breath hitched, coming in short, sharp pants that didn't seem to reach her lungs. A cold sweat broke out on her skin. She was back in her room waiting for the footsteps on the stairs. She was on the floor, curled around broken ribs. She was going to vomit. She was going to scream. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Anya's other arm wrapped around her chest, holding her tight against a wiry, strong body. "Breathe," Anya hissed in her ear, her voice a blade of steel. "Through your nose. Quietly." Sienna tried. She sucked in a shuddering breath through her nose, the scent of rogue filling her, threatening to choke her. She shook violently in Anya's grip. "Listen to me," Anya whispered, her mouth still close to Sienna's ear. "He is downwind. He is searching, not finding. You are a stone. You are a fern. You do not exist." Anya's words were a lifeline. Sienna clung to them. A stone. A fern. She forced another breath, then another, fighting against the panic that wanted to unravel her. She focused on the feel of Anya's rough-spun wool against her cheek, the solidity of the ground beneath her knees. She pushed the memories back, visualized herself fading into the grey rock and green moss. They stayed like that, frozen for an eternity. Sienna's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum she was sure the whole forest could hear. Then the scent began to fade, carried away on a shift of the wind. They heard the faint, distant crunch of a footstep on dry leaves, moving east, away from them. Then, nothing. Anya didn't let go until long after the silence had returned. When she did, Sienna slumped forward, her forehead touching the cold earth, trembling from head to foot. The panic attack left her drained, humiliated, and deeply afraid. Not just of the scout, but of herself, of the broken thing inside her that a mere smell could trigger. "He is searching in a grid," Anya said, her voice low and grim. She was scanning the tree line, her old eyes missing nothing. "They have not given up. Your alpha's pride is wounded. He will tear these woods apart, plank by plank, to find you and prove a point." Sienna pushed herself up, wiping her mouth with a trembling hand. The sanctuary of the roundhouse, which had felt like a fortress, now felt like a trap. A single cosy fire glowing in the vast, hunted dark. "I have to go," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I've brought this to your door. If they find this place, they will kill me and burn it to the ground," Anya finished bluntly. "Yes." She looked at Sienna, no judgment in her face, only a weary certainty. "The shelter was for healing, not for hiding forever. Your body is mended enough to travel. Your spirit, that is a journey you must continue elsewhere." The finality of it was a new kind of pain. This tiny, quiet world had been a lifeline. Letting go felt like another amputation. "Where can I go?" Desolation seeped into her voice. "There is no safe territory. He'll have scouts at every border." Anya was silent for a long moment, thinking. Then she nodded, as if coming to a decision. "There is one place, the Silvervale Pack. Their territory lies 3 days' hard walk to the north across the Stone Sisters Mountains." Sienna had heard of them. Vaguely. In Corbin's compound they were spoken of with derision. "The healers," she said, the title sounding weak in her mouth. "The pacifists. The survivors," Anya corrected. "They have held their fertile valley not by claw and fang, but by wisdom, by alliance, and by making themselves more valuable whole than conquered. Their alpha, Theron, is no weakling. He is a diplomat. And their healer, Kieran, his gifts are said to be profound. They do not turn away the wounded." She fixed Sienna with her clear gaze. "But you must understand. It is a different world. Your reflexes, your fear, it will mark you there as clearly as a brand. You must learn to sheath your claws." The idea of a pack that didn't rule by terror was as foreign and frightening as the deep woods had once been. But it was a direction, a destination. That evening, in the roundhouse, the atmosphere had changed. The quiet was now charged with impending departure. Anya prepared a small pack for her, strips of dried venison, cakes of nut and berry meal, a water skin. From a small, locked chest made of dark ironwood, she retrieved a final gift. It was a pendant, a single, perfect bloom of moonflower, preserved in some clear, hardened resin that looked like captured moonlight, hanging on a leather thong. It glowed with a soft, internal silver luminescence. "This is the last of my stock," Anya said, placing it in Sienna's hand. It was cool to the touch. "The resin masks scent almost completely for a time. It will not make you invisible, but it will blur you. Make you smell of rain and stone and nothing else. Use it only if you are cornered. It is precious." Sienna clutched the pendant, another weight of gratitude added to the impossible debt she owed this woman. "I don't know how to thank you." "You thank me by surviving," Anya said simply. "By becoming more than a ghost." She pointed to the clay pot by the window. "Take the seed with you, a reminder that growth is possible, even when carried." As dusk settled, Sienna stood at the door of the roundhouse, looking out at the darkening woods. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, for the first time, was a thread of agency. She was not fleeing blindly. She was travelling to somewhere. It was then that the sound came. It was far away, so distant it was more a vibration in the earth than a noise in the air. A howl, long drawn out and saturated with a fury so deep it had curdled into something obsessive, eternal. It was not the roar of immediate pursuit she'd heard at the river. This was the sound of a beast that had turned hunting into a religion, a vow spoken to the moon night after night. It was Corbin's voice, twisted by Kratos' endless rage. It was a promise woven into the wind itself. It came from the southwest, closer than the river, much closer. He was methodical, he was patient, and he was coming. The sanctuary shattered completely. The woods were no longer silent, they were listening, and they were full of echo. Sienna turned to Anya, her face pale in the firelight. The time for healing was over. "The Stone Sisters," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "North." Anya gave a single sharp nod. "Go now. Travel by night. Stay off the ridges. Let the moonflower guide you if you are lost." She reached out and gripped Sienna's shoulder, the touch brief but fierce. "Remember the silence. It is your weapon too." Sienna shouldered the small pack. She carefully scooped the unsprouted seed and its soil into a smaller leather pouch and tied it to her belt. She slipped the moonflower pendant over her head, tucking it under her tunic where it lay against her skin, a cool, secret moon against her breastbone. With one last look at the warm, fire-lit roundhouse, at the woman who had been a stranger and had become a saviour, Sienna stepped out into the deepening dark. The howl seemed to hang in the air behind her, a spectre driving her forward. She was alone again, but she was not the same broken creature who'd crawled from the river. She was a ghost with a direction, a wounded thing with a seed and a secret moon, walking into the teeth of the hunting wind. The Stone Sisters were not mountains of grandeur, but teeth of granite, jagged, unforgiving and bitterly cold. Sienna's journey across them was a 3-day descent into a raw elemental state. She moved by night, as Anya had instructed, guided by a sliver of moon and the cold, distant gleam of stars. The moonflower pendant, tucked beneath her layers, did its work. She smelled of nothing but damp wool and the faint, clean scent of polished river stone. She became a creature of shadow and instinct, Arya's heightened senses her only compass in the treacherous dark. Hunger was a constant, gnawing companion, then a dull, accepted ache. She rationed Anya's dried meat and hard cakes with a Mrs. care. Thirst drove her to lick dew from moss and suck on clean snowmelt. Sleep was stolen in shallow, freezing hollows beneath overhangs of rock, her body curled tight for warmth, her ears straining for any sound that was not the wind. Each time she closed her eyes, the phantom howl from the southern wind seemed to echo in her dreams, a bass note of dread beneath her exhaustion. She saw no more scouts. The howl did not come again, but the absence was not peace. It was the tense, held breath of the forest itself. It was the silence of a predator who has gone to ground, listening. On the morning of the 4th day, the land began to soften. The jagged granite gave way to steep, forested slopes, and then to rolling foothills rich with the scent of cedar and loam. Following the flow of water, she found a stream that widened into a gentle river, its banks lined with smooth, white stones. The air grew warmer, softer. She had crossed the spine of the world. According to Anya's directions, the Silvervale territory lay in the next valley, marked by a stand of ancient, colossal pines with bark the colour of ash and silver. She found them as the sun began its westward slide, a line of sentinels so tall they seemed to hold up the sky, their canopies forming a perpetual dappled twilight on the forest floor below. The border. She stood at the edge of the silver pine grove, her body trembling with more than fatigue. This was a threshold. Beyond it lay not wilderness, but a pack, rules, alphas, judging eyes. The fear that had driven her across mountains now curdled into a different kind of terror, the fear of belonging. Her appearance was that of a wild thing. Her clothes were torn and stained, her hair a tangled mat of dirt and leaves. She was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp under skin smudged with grime. The only clean things about her were her eyes, wide and haunted, and the smooth river stone she clutched in one filthy hand. She looked like what she was, a feral creature, possibly dangerous, certainly broken. Arya stirred within, not with aggression, but with a wary curiosity. The scent here was different, clean, complex. Pine, yes, but also the scent of many wolves living closely. Hearth smoke, baking bread, tanned leather, medicinal herbs. It was the smell of community. It was utterly disorienting. She took one step into the shade of the silver pines, then another. The official border, she knew, would be marked and patrolled. She had to be found before she was considered a trespasser, an invader. She didn't have to wait long. A shift in the air, a soft rustle of needles. 2 wolves melted from the shadows between the great trees. They were large, powerfully built, their fur a mix of greys and tawny browns. They did not snarl, they'd not advance. They simply stood, blocking her path, their postures alert but not immediately hostile. Border guards. Sienna froze. Every instinct screamed to run, to drop into a defensive crouch, to show her teeth. She forced her hands to stay at her sides, her chin to stay up. "I seek sanctuary," she said, her voice a dry rasp from disuse, from Anya of the Wildwood. "I am wounded." The wolves looked at each other. One gave a soft, chuffing sound. The larger one turned and padded silently back the way it had come. The other remained, watching her with unblinking golden eyes. It was a silent escort, a contained threat. The message was clear. Move, and we will react. Stay, and you will be dealt with. Time stretched. Sienna's legs shook with the effort of standing still. The scent of the pack grew stronger, weaving with her own fear scent. She was sure they could smell the rogue on her, the history of violence clinging to her like a second skin. Then the guard wolf returned. With him came a man. He was not an alpha. He did not carry himself with the aggressive, chest-out dominance of Corbin or his enforcers. He was tall and lean, dressed in simple, earth-toned trousers and a tunic, a worn leather satchel slung across his chest. His hair was the colour of dark honey, tied loosely back, and his face was all quiet angles, a thoughtful brow, a straight nose, a mouth that seemed more accustomed to listening than commanding. But it was his eyes that arrested her. They were the colour of a summer forest after rain, a deep, clear green flecked with gold, and they held no aggression, no immediate suspicion. They held a profound, unsettling attention. He looked at her, and she felt, for the first time in years, truly seen. Not as a prize, a possession, or a threat, but as a phenomenon. A wounded animal washed up on a strange shore. He stopped a respectful distance away, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, not assessing her value or her threat level, but cataloguing her injuries, her exhaustion, her state of shock. The clinical detachment in his look was somehow more respectful than pity. "Anya's name is a rare key," he said. His voice matched his eyes, calm, deep, with a gentle resonance. "I am Kieran, healer of the Silvervale Pack. You were at our border." He didn't ask who she was, he stated facts, leaving space for her. Sienna's voice failed, she swallowed, her throat clicking. I have nowhere else." The admission was a bare, broken thing. Kieran nodded slowly. "Sanctuary is asked for, and it is given, pending the Alpha's judgment. But first, healing." He took a step closer. The guard wolf tensed slightly, but Kieran held up a hand, a small, fluid gesture. "She is no threat to me, Loris. Look at her." He came to stand before her. He was close enough now that she could smell him. Soap root, clean linen, and the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic herbs. It was the least threatening scent she had ever encountered from a male wolf. Yet her body was a coiled spring. When he reached out, not to grab, but to gently take her wrist and check her pulse, she flinched so violently she nearly fell. Kieran stopped, his hand hovering in the air, his green eyes held hers. "I will not harm you," he said, the words simple, absolute. "But you are injured. Your pulse is a bird trapped in a cage. You are favouring your left side. May I see?" It was the "may I" that undid her. A request. A choice. In all her time with Corbin, she had never been given a choice about her own body. The shock of it unlocked her paralysed muscles. She gave a tiny, jerky nod. His touch was like nothing she had ever felt. His fingers were cool and sure as they probed the old break in her ribs through her tunic, his pressure firm but never painful. He checked the swelling in her ankle, examined the numerous scrapes and bruises that mapped her journey. His touch was diagnostic, impersonal, and yet imbued with a concentrated kindness that was almost a physical warmth. He saw the wounds, but he did not see the story behind them. He simply saw damage that needed mending. "The ribs are healed, but poorly. They will ache in the cold. You are dehydrated, malnourished, exhausted." He released her wrist and met her gaze again. "These things I can help with, the rest." He paused, his head tilting slightly. "You carry a title you do not wish to name, and a fear that has a very specific scent." He knew, of course he knew. A healer perceived things others missed. Sienna's heart hammered again. Would he turn her away? A rogue's Luna was baggage, danger. "I was a Luna," she whispered, the confession torn from her. Not by choice, not anymore." Kieran studied her face for a long moment, his green eyes seeing the shadows under her eyes, the way she held her jaw tight against tremors. He saw the ghost of a proud woman in the set of her shoulders and the terrified girl in the white-knuckled grip on her stone. "Titles are what packs give," he said finally, his voice so soft it was almost part of the forest sigh. "Scars are what we earn. Come. The Healer's Lodge is a place of quiet. You can rest there." He turned and began to walk back into the silver pines, not looking back to see if she followed. It was an act of profound trust. The guard wolf, Loris, fell into step behind her silent escort. She followed Kieran, her steps clumsy. They emerged from the grove into the Silvervale proper, and Sienna's breath caught. It was not a fortified compound. It was a community. Lodges of smooth, honey-coloured wood and river stone were nestled among the trees, connected by winding, pebbled paths. Gardens bloomed with vegetables and medicinal herbs. A central green held a large communal fire pit, currently cold. Wolves in human form went about their tasks, weaving, tanning hides, tending children. They looked up as Kieran passed, their eyes curious but not hostile when they saw the ragged stranger in his wake. Their scents were myriad, individual, but woven through with a common thread of calm security. It was the opposite of the rogue camp's tense, aggressive simmer. The healer's lodge was at the edge of the clearing, backed against a rocky outcrop, where a small waterfall trickled into a basin. Inside, it was all warm wood and shelves holding hundreds of jars, bottles, and drying plants. The air was a complex symphony of smells: mint, chamomile, bitterroot, honey. A fire crackled in a hearth, and several low, comfortable-looking cots lined one wall. Kieran gestured to one. "Sit." She sat, the softness of the cot almost painful after days of stone and earth. He brought her a cup of water, then a bowl of rich, fragrant broth. She drank and ate under his silent observation, her manners forgotten, consumed by basic need. The warmth of the food spread through her a palpable comfort. When she was done, he took the bowl and set it aside. "The injury to your side," he said. "The old break, it causes you pain when you breathe deeply, yes?" She nodded. "I have a salve. It will not re-break the bone, but it will soothe the deep ache, help the muscles remember how to lie correctly. It must be applied to the skin." He held up a small clay jar. "You may apply it yourself in privacy, or if you allow, I can. I am a healer. Your body to me is a landscape to be tended, nothing more." The choice again. The terrifying, liberating choice. She looked at his calm, patient face, at his hands which had touched her with such sterile care. She thought Corbin's hands, which had only ever taken. Slowly, hesitantly, she pulled up the edge of her tunic, just enough to expose the bruised, discoloured skin over her ribs. She turned her face away, bracing for she didn't know what. Kieran's fingers, coated in a cool green-tinged salve that smelled of wintergreen and arnica, touched her skin. She flinched, but held still. His touch was exactly as before, firm, purposeful, healing. He worked the salve into the tight, knotted muscles around the old break, his pressure unerringly finding the points of tension. There was no possessiveness in it, no hint of anything but pure, focused intent to mend. As the salve began to warm, driving a soothing heat deep into the ache, something in Sienna's chest, something even more tightly wound than her muscles, began to loosen. A single hot tear escaped her clamped-shut eyes and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He finished, wiped his hands on a clean cloth and pulled her tunic down. "Rest now," he said, his voice a gentle command. "You are safe within these walls. No one will enter without your leave." He turned to go, giving her the profound gift of solitude in safety. "Kieran," she whispered. He paused at the doorway. "Thank you." The words were inadequate, but they were all she had. He looked back, and for the first time she saw a true, gentle smile touch his lips, softening the quiet angles of his face. "The thanks is in the healing, Sienna," he said. And then he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. He had used her name. She hadn't given it to him. Sienna sat on the cot, the warmth of the salve seeping into her bones, the warmth of the broth in her belly, the warmth of a kindness without cost in her heart. She looked around the peaceful, herb-scented lodge. She looked at the clean bandages, the orderly shelves, the crackling fire. She had seen the strength of the Silvervale pack not in walls or weapons, but in the steady hands of its healer and the calm security of its people. It was a different kind of power. And as she sat there, the ghost of a proud Luna and the reality of a broken survivor collided within her, and she felt a new, crushing pain, not of injury, but of loss. The loss of what a pack, what a home was supposed to be, what she had never had. She curled up on the cot, the clean fur blanket pulled over her, and let the silent tears come. They were not tears of terror this time. They were tears of unbearable, beautiful, heartbreaking hope. The healer's lodge became a new kind of sanctuary. Arya, finally feeling true safety, fell into a deep restorative sleep within Sienna's soul, a luxury she hadn't known since before the mate bond. For 3 days, Sienna did little but rest, eat the simple, nourishing food left for her and soak in the quiet. Kieran checked on her twice daily, his visits brief and clinical, but his green eyes noting the return of colour to her cheeks, the easing of the perpetual tension in her shoulders. He asked no questions. He simply tended. On the 4th morning, he brought a change of clothes, soft, grey trousers and a tunic of undyed linen. "The Alpha Theron would speak with you this afternoon," he said, his tone neutral. "He is fair. He will hear your story." The peace shattered. The spectre of an Alpha, any Alpha, sent a chill through her. Would he see a liability? A pawn to be used against Corbin, a weakling to be cast out? She spent the morning in a state of coiled anxiety, the old habits of fear reasserting themselves. She found herself listening for the cadence of approaching footsteps, her body instinctively preparing to make itself small. Alpha Theron was not what she expected. He met her in a sun-dappled glade behind the lodge, not a formal meeting hall. He was a man in his prime, his dark hair shot with silver at the temples, his bearing relaxed but radiating a calm, unmovable authority. His eyes, a warm brown, held intelligence and a deep patience. "Kieran tells me you seek sanctuary, and that you carry a story that is not your fault but is now your burden," Theron began, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "We do not turn away the wounded in Silvervale, but harbouring another Alpha's mate, even a reluctant one, carries consequences. I must understand what follows you." So she told him. Not everything. Not the visceral horror of the beatings or the depth of her despair. But she told him of Corbin, of his expansion through violence, of her gilded cage, of her escape. She told him of the Sunfall boy. She told him of the river. She did not look at him as she spoke, her eyes fixed on a patch of clover at her feet. When she finished, the silence hung heavy. "The Blackwater rogue," Theron mused, his face grave. "We have heard rumours of his consolidation, a storm building in the south." He studied her, and the bond, it is still intact. The question was a knife twist. Sienna nodded, her hand drifting unconsciously to the place over her heart where the barbed hook lived. "It's quieter here, but it's there, a pull. A wrongness." Theron exchanged a long look with Kieran, who had been standing silently nearby, a look that spoke of grim understanding. "A living bond to a wolf like that is a leash he can yank at any time," Theron said. "It is a threat to you, and a vulnerability to my pack. He could use it to find you, to destabilise you, or worse." "Worse?" Sienna's voice was a thread. Kieran spoke now, his green eyes solemn. "He could use it to assert dominance from a distance, to summon you, to break your mind if his will is strong enough and his rage is great enough. The bond is a conduit. Right now it is dormant, but it is not dead." The horror of it settled over her, colder than the river. She had thought escape was putting distance between them, but the worst of the cage had come with her, woven into her very spirit. Can it be cut? The question was a desperate whisper. Kieran and Theron looked at each other again. The silence this time was heavier, fraught with something Sienna didn't understand. "There is a way," Kieran said finally, his voice low. "A ritual. It is ancient, and it is brutal. It is not like rejecting a mate before a bond is sealed. This is tearing out a part of your soul that has grown roots. It is excruciating. It is dangerous. Some do not survive the shock. Others survive, but their wolf does not." Sienna's blood ran cold. Arya, to sever the bond might mean killing the only part of herself that had kept her alive. "And if I don't?" "You remain a beacon," Theron said gently but firmly, "and a potential weapon he can turn against us. You cannot truly be free, and we cannot truly offer sanctuary while that tether exists. The choice, however, is yours. It is your soul, your wolf. The choice. It was no choice at all. Live as a hunted, haunted thing, forever vulnerable, forever putting others in danger, or risk annihilation for a chance at true freedom." She thought of Arya's snarling defiance in the cabin, her gentle presence in the quiet of the lodge. She thought of the seed still unsprouted in its pouch. Growth required breaking open the shell. "I'll do it," she said, the words leaving her lips before she could reconsider. The ritual was set for the next full moon. The Silvervale pack mobilised not for war, but for a profound act of healing. The clearing where it would happen was prepared. A sacred circle of white river stones beneath the largest silver pine, bathed in the moon's direct light. Herbs for purification were burned. The entire pack, at Theron's request, would lend their peaceful collective strength to hold the space. As the moon rose, vast and cold and white, Sienna was led to the circle. She wore a simple white shift. She felt terrifyingly exposed. The pack surrounded the clearing, a ring of silent, solemn witnesses. Theron stood at the northern point, a steady, anchoring presence. Kieran stood in the centre with her. "This will not be a battle of strength," Kieran murmured to her, his face pale but resolute in the moonlight. "It is a surgery of the spirit. You must choose to let go. You must find the golden cord, now rusted and barbed, and you must, with your own will, cut it. We will be here, We will hold you, but the final cut, it must be yours. He gave her a draught to drink, a potion of numbing herbs and heart strengtheners that tasted of lightning and earth. It steadied her trembling limbs, but did nothing for the ice in her veins. The ritual began. The pack started a low harmonic hum, a wordless song of support that vibrated in the earth. Kieran placed his hands on her shoulders, his healer's energy flowing into her, a cool, guiding light. Theron's voice boomed, not in command but in invocation, calling on the moon to witness a soul's reclamation. "Find the bond, Sienna," Kieran whispered. She closed her eyes, turning inward, past the fear, past the memories, into the deepest well of her being, and there it was, no longer just a feeling, but a thing she could see in her mind's eye. A cord, once bright gold, now blackened and gnarled, studded with hooks that dug deep into the fabric of her spirit. It pulsed with a sick, familiar energy, Corbin's possessive rage, his wounded pride. It was a corruption. It was the root of all her pain. As she focused on it, something across the vast distance stirred. A wave of corrosive fury slammed down the bond, so sudden and violent it knocked the breath from her lungs. Corbin's consciousness, vast and dark and infuriated, flooded her. His will was a crushing weight, a voice of pure command that echoed in the vault of her skull. "Sinner, traitor, you are mine. Come back." It was not words, it was a tsunami of compulsion. Her body jerked, muscles twitching to obey, her knees buckled, the pack's hum faltered. Kieran's hands tightened on her shoulders, his energy surging to form a dam against the onslaught. "He knows," Theron shouted. "He feels you touching it! Sienna, now! You must do it now!" The pain was beyond anything physical. It was her soul being ripped in two opposing directions. Corbin's will hauled on the bond, trying to reel her in, to shatter her mind with his dominance. Kieran and the pack's energy braced against it, holding her in place. She was the rope in a tug of war for her own existence. "Come to me!" Corbin's psychic roar was deafening. Visions assaulted her, his face twisted in rage, his hands closing around her throat. The darkness of the breaking cell. She was failing. The bond was too strong. His will was too powerful. She was just a broken thing, after all. A warmth blossomed in her chest. Not Kieran's healing energy. Something older, gentler. The painted stone, tucked against her skin, seemed to grow warm. A memory surfaced, clear as the moon above, her father's voice. "For when the night seems too dark, little moon." And from the depths where she had been resting, Arya awoke. Her wolf did not snarl. She stood, magnificent and silver in the inner landscape, and placed herself between Sienna's fragile spirit and the black cord. She looked at Sienna, her golden eyes holding no fear, only a fierce, luminous love. "This is not us," her gaze said. "This was never us. Cut it." With a scream that was both physical and spiritual, Sienna gathered every shard of her will. The girl who loved her parents, the woman who helped a stranger escape, the survivor who crossed mountains, the spark that Anya fanned, the seed waiting to grow. She forged them into a single, blinding blade of intention. She looked at the black barbed cord, at the source of all her nightmares. She felt Corbin's raging pull. She felt the pack's steadfast support. She felt Arya's unwavering presence. With a final silent cry of utter rejection, she brought the blade down. The sound was not audible, but it echoed through every soul present. A scream of tearing reality, a crack of breaking magic. The cord snapped. The backlash was catastrophic. A concussive wave of agony erupted from her core, vaporizing thought, sense, self. It was the pain of amputation at the spiritual root. It was dying while still alive. She felt pieces of her, memories, emotions, the very shape of her longing shred and fly apart. Corbin's presence vanished, severed, leaving a yawning silent void where the relentless pull had been. Sienna collapsed. Kieran caught her, lowering her to the chilled earth. The pack's hum had stopped, replaced by a stunned, ringing silence. The moonlight seemed too bright, too cold. She floated it in a numb, grey nothingness. There was no pain anymore. There was nothing. The bond was gone. The constant background noise of her captivity was absent. It was a silence more profound than any she had ever known. And in that silence she felt a new, terrifying emptiness. A hollow place where a vital presence had always been, even in its anguish. Arya? No answer. No warm third presence. No gentle curiosity. No protective rumble. Nothing. A howl of pure desolate loss tore from Sienna's throat, a sound so raw it made the pack wolves flinch. She had done it. She was free of Corbin. and she was utterly, completely alone. Kieran held her as she wept, great shuddering sobs that had no sound. He checked her pulse, her breath, his healer's mind assessing the damage. The body lived. The spirit was in ruins. As the first hint of dawn bleached the edges of the sky, Sienna lay exhausted, hollowed out like a gourd. The world felt thin, insubstantial. She was a ghost in truth now, untethered from everything. Then, as the first true ray of sunlight pierced the clearing, cutting through the silver pine branches, she felt it. Not a presence. A whisper. A faint, familiar scent in the very back of her mind, like the memory of rain on dry earth, a flicker of gold in the inner darkness, so faint it might have been imagination. A single weary thought, softer than a sigh, brushed against the walls of her hollow self. We are free. It was Aragon, not dead, wounded, dormant, but there, a spark in the ashes of the self. Sienna's breath hitched. The tears still fell, but they changed. They were no longer just of loss. They were of a painful, unimaginable liberation. The cage was gone. The chain was broken. She was empty, yes, but she was hers. As the sun rose over Silvervale, Sienna, curled in the sacred circle, finally understood the cost of her freedom. She had paid for it with a piece of her soul, but the part that remained, the part that could still feel the sun, that could still hear that faint whisper, was finally, irrevocably, her own. The days after the severing were a slow, painful reassembly of a self. The hollow emptiness was a constant companion, a new kind of quiet, where Arya's presence had once been. Sienna moved through the healer's lodge like a sleepwalker, her body healed but her spirit convalescing. Kieran was a patient, steady presence. He didn't crowd her with questions or false cheer. He simply made sure she ate, that she slept, that she had the space to simply be in the aftermath of the cataclysm. She would sit for hours by the waterfall behind the lodge, the painted stone warm in her hand, and just listen to the whisper of Arya in her mind. It wasn't a voice. It was a feeling, a fragile sense of watchfulness, a deep, weary peace. Her wolf was not gone. She was healing too, in a deeper, more fundamental way, learning what it meant to exist without the constant poison of the bond. As the emptiness gradually filled with the gentle rhythms of Silvervale, the scent of baking bread, the laughter of children at play, the quiet industry of a pack at peace, something new began to grow in its place. Not the fiery defiance of before, but a quiet, observant empathy. She saw the subtle tensions in the pack. A young warrior chafing under the peaceful ways, a mother grieving a lost mate, an elder struggling with stiffening joints. She saw not just people, but their silent wounds. One afternoon, a young she-wolf named Lyra was brought to the lodge, shaking and wild-eyed after a nasty scare from a territorial bear on a solo patrol. The girl's wolf was panicked, threatening to force a shift in the crowded space. The other healers moved to administer calming draughts, but Sienna felt a strange pull. She approached slowly, her movements non-threatening. She didn't speak. She simply sat on the floor beside Lyra's cot, close but not touching. She closed her eyes and reached for that quiet, watchful place inside her where Arya rested. She didn't try to project dominance or even comfort. She simply listened. She opened herself to the girl's fear, not to absorb it, but to acknowledge it. A faint, silvery warmth, the barest echo of Arya, seemed to emanate from her. It wasn't a power, it was an understanding. A shared language of silent survival. Slowly, Lyra's shaking subsided. Her panic breaths evened out. Her eyes, fixed on Sienna, lost their wild glaze. You feel it, Lyra whispered, amazed. The fear, you don't push it away. It has a right to be here, Sienna said softly, her first real words to anyone other than Kieran in days. But it doesn't get to be in charge. Kieran, watching from the doorway, said nothing, but his green eyes held a new thoughtful light. That small incident became a pattern. Sienna found herself drawn to the wounded, the anxious, the grief-stricken. She had no magic to cure physical ailments, but she had a profound, hard-won talent for sitting with emotional pain. She became a silent anchor in the lodge. Warriors with nightmares would find calm in her presence. Pups separated from their mothers would curl up near her, soothed by her steady stillness. Her empathy, forged in the crucible of her own suffering, became a subtle, potent gift. She was no longer the lost Luna. To Silvervale, she was becoming Sienna, the stillness, a quiet mystery who carried profound peace in her eyes. It was during a lesson with Kieran on the properties of moon-drenched herbs that the peace shattered. A scout burst into the lodge, his chest heaving, his face etched with urgency. "Alpha, Kieran, rogue wolves at the southern tree line, a full war party, 20 strong, led by a massive black-furred alpha." Corbin. The name was a cold stone dropped into Sienna's gut. He had come. Not with stealth, but with a show of force. His wounded pride would accept nothing less than a frontal assault, a burning of the sanctuary that dared to shelter what was his. The Silvervale pack, a people of healers and growers, mobilized with a speed that surprised her. There was no panic, only a grim, focused determination. Theron's orders were crisp. Non-combatants to the fortified granary, warriors to the perimeter. They would defend, not attack. Their strategy was one of resilience, of outlasting the storm. Sienna stood frozen in the middle of the suddenly chaotic lodge. This was her fault. Her freedom had brought a war to these peaceful people. The old guilt, the conviction of her own catastrophic nature, rose like bile. Kieran gripped her arm. To the granary. Now. She shook her head, a strange clarity cutting through the fear. No. She met his surprised gaze. He's not here for your territory. He's here for me, for the insult. I have to face him. That's a death wish, Kieran said, his voice tight. Maybe, Sienna said. Her heart was a frantic bird, but her mind was eerily calm. She looked toward the southern edge of the village, where the first sounds of clashing and snarling were beginning to rise. But I won't let others die in a fight that is mine. She thought of the Sunfall boy. She would not be the cause of more cages. Before Kieran could stop her, she was moving, not toward safety, but toward the sound of violence. She walked, her head high, her steps deliberate. She passed Silvervale warriors forming defensive lines, their faces set. She saw the fear in their eyes, but also the resolve. They were defending their home, her home, if only for a little while. She emerged from between two lodges and saw the battlefield. It was chaos. The rogues were a whirlwind of fury, all snapping teeth and ruthless efficiency. The Silvervale wolves fought defensively, using the terrain, fighting in pairs, their style one of protection and clever deflection rather than savage offence. But they were being pushed back. At the centre of it all, a monster of a black wolf stood head and shoulders above the rest. Kratos. Corbin's eyes blazed with triumphant, murderous rage as he swatted a Silvervale warrior aside like a fly. He hadn't seen her yet. Sienna took a deep breath. She reached not for strength, not for Arya's fury, but for that deep well of empathy, for the silent language of shared pain. She walked into the no-man's land between the two clashing lines. Corbin! Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the din of snarls and clashing bodies. The fighting stuttered. All eyes turned to her. Kratos' massive head swung around. The amber eyes locked onto her, and a tremor of primal fear threatened to buckle her knees. This was the beast that had haunted her nightmares, the source of all her pain in the flesh. He shifted. The transformation was a blur of muscle and shadow, and then Corbin stood there, naked and glistening with sweat and the blood of others, his handsome face a mask of twisted fury and perverse delight. "Sienna," he purred, the sound oily with possession. "You came back. You finally learned your place." "I learned I never had one with you," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden hush. She didn't advance. She simply stood, a slight figure in linen before the hulking, bloodied alpha. "I am not yours, I never was." His face darkened. The bond is gone. A petty trick, but the claim remains, in blood, in memory. You. Mine. He took a step forward, his dominance rolling off him in a suffocating wave. The rogues behind him snarled in anticipation. The Silvervale wolves tensed. Sienna didn't flinch. She looked past him to the rogues. She saw not a unified army, but individuals. She saw the young, scared eyes of new recruits. She saw the hollow, deadened gazes of wolves broken long ago. She saw the flicker of doubt in some as they looked from her calm defiance to Corbin raging obsession. "He tells you he makes you strong," she said, her voice lifting, not in a shout, but in a clear carrying tone meant for them. "He breaks you and calls it strength. He takes everything from you, your will, your peace, your pack, and tells you it's a gift." She took a step forward now, not toward Corbin, but along the line between the forces, her eyes scanning the rogue ranks. "I know, because he took it from me. I was his Luna. I lived in the gilded cage, and I tell you, there is nothing strong about living in fear of your own alpha. There is nothing strong about following a wolf who confuses terror for loyalty. Corbin let out a roar of outrage and lunged for her. Theron and 2 Silvervale warriors intercepted him, a blur of tawny fur and snapping teeth, holding him back just feet from her. The clash reignited around them, but it was secondary now. This was the true battlefield. Sienna stood her ground, the violence swirling around her. She focused on a young rogue who reminded her of the Sunfall boy, his knuckles white on his weapon, his eyes wide with conflict. "You have a choice," she said, directly to him, to all of them. "You can die here for his wounded pride, or you can lay down your weapons. You can walk away from the breaking cell. You can choose a life that is your own." Her words were not a weapon, they were a key, sliding into locks long rusted shut. They spoke to the secret, unacknowledged shame of following a tyrant, to the buried longing for something more. One rogue, an older wolf with a scarred muzzle, lowered his axe. He took a step back, then another, his eyes on the ground. "Traitor!" Corbin screamed, shaking off his attackers for a moment to backhand the old wolf, sending him sprawling. But the spell was broken. The act of violence against his own, for the crime of hesitation, was the final proof of Sienna's words. Another rogue dropped his weapon. Then another. A ripple of disengagement went through the rogue ranks. They weren't joining Silvervale. They were simply stopping. The fight was leaching out of them, replaced by a dawning, awful clarity. Corbin stood alone, surrounded by a shrinking circle of his most fanatical enforcers, his grand war crumbling not from defeat in battle, but from the simple, undeniable truth spoken by the woman he thought he owned. He looked at Sienna, his rage so pure it seemed to bleach the colour from his face. He had come to conquer, to burn, to reclaim, and she had disarmed him not with a blade, but with a quiet truth that unmade his entire world. "You witch," he spat, the words barely human. Sienna finally looked directly at him, her empathy falling away, leaving only cold, clear certainty. "I am Sienna," she said, "and you are nothing to me." With a final, incoherent roar of frustration, Corbin shifted back into Kratos, but the fight was gone from his followers. Theron, seeing the shift, gave a signal. The Silvervale warriors closed in, not to slaughter, but to capture, to subdue the raging alpha now isolated by his own toxic legacy. The battle for Silvervale was over. It had been won not on the field of tooth and claw, but on the field of spirit. Sienna stood amidst the settling dust and the moans of the wounded, her knees weak. She had faced her monster, and she had not fought him with his own weapons. She had fought with the only weapon she had left after he had taken everything else, the truth of her own experience. She had fought to save, not to conquer. She felt a familiar, warm presence at her side. Kieran. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, a solid, silent support. Theron approached, his warrior's mind giving way to a look of profound, weary respect. Around them, Silvervale wolves were already moving, tending their wounded, cautiously disarming the rogue defectors. The sun, which had been hidden by the chaos, broke through the trees, painting the scene in the gold of late afternoon. Sienna looked at her hands, clean and empty. They had held no weapon, they had planted a seed, they had soothed a frightened girl, and today they had, in their way, turned back a war. She was not a Luna of shadows and fear. She was not a pawn or a possession. She was something new, something born in a river, nurtured in silence and tested in the dawn light of a different kind of battle. She was Sienna. And for the first time, the title that followed felt not like a chain, but like a choice, waiting to be made. The aftermath was a study in contrasts. While Silvervale warriors secured the subdued Corbin Kratos in magically reinforced chains forged from river-cooled iron, the real work began. The rogue defectors, some 24 wolves, stood in a shamed, uncertain cluster. They were not welcomed with open arms. The memory of their snarling advance was too fresh. But they were not slaughtered. Under Theron's orders, they were disarmed, given water, and watched by a stern but not cruel guard. Sienna watched it all from the edge of the clearing, the adrenaline ebbing to leave her trembling. Kieran pressed a cup of something warm and sweet into her hands. "Drink, your energy is spent." She drank mechanically, her eyes on Corbin. He was chained to the great silver pine, his human form returned, head bowed, but his shoulders radiating a hatred so potent it seemed to smoke in the cool air. The monster was captured but not tamed. He was a poison sealed in a jar, still lethal. Theron approached her, his expression unreadable. The Pack Council will decide his fate. Justice, not vengeance. But that is for later. He paused, his brown eyes searching her face. What you did today, it was not a warrior's act. It was a leader's act. You saw the wound in the enemy's spirit and you applied pressure to it. You saved countless lives on both sides. Sienna shook her head, the weight of the day settling on her. I brought the danger here. And you unmade it, Theron countered firmly. That is the balance. He looked over at the defectors, then back at her. They listened to you. They heard a truth in your words that their alpha's roars had drowned out. That is a power Silvervale has never cultivated. The power of the healed wound to understand the fresh one. He left her with those words, moving to oversee the triage of the wounded. Sienna's gaze drifted from Corbin's hateful silence to the defectors. She saw the old wolf he had struck, holding a cloth to his bleeding mouth. She saw the young one, who looked like the Sunfall boy, staring at his hands as if he'd never seen them before. Without conscious thought, her feet carried her toward them. The Silvervale guards tensed, but Kieran, watching, gave a slight shake of his head. She stopped before the old wolf. He flinched, expecting punishment. Instead, Sienna knelt, ignoring the protest in her long-heeled ribs. She took the clean cloth from a nearby healer's basket and offered it to him, replacing the blood-soaked one he held. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice quiet. He stared at her, confusion warring with ingrained suspicion. "Roven," he grunted finally. "You were brave today, Roven," she said. "The first step away from a cliff is the hardest." She moved to the young one. He couldn't meet her eyes. "He promised us strength," the boy mumbled. "He promised we would never be weak again." "And are you strong?" Sienna asked, not unkindly. The boy finally looked up, his eyes hollow. "I feel empty." She nodded. "The cage is gone. That's the first feeling, the emptiness. It's where you decide what to fill it with." She didn't offer answers. She simply acknowledged the truth of his condition as Anya had once done for her. She moved among them, not as a saviour, but as a fellow traveller who knew the landscape of their shame. She said little. Her presence, her lack of fear or condemnation was the message. Over the next few days, as Silvervale healed its physical wounds and convened its council, Sienna found her place. Not in the council lodge, but in the spaces between. She worked in the healer's lodge, her quiet empathy a perfect complement to Kieran's clinical skill. She helped organise food and shelter for the defectors, who were being assessed individually. Not all were redeemable, but many were simply lost. One evening, as she tended the small clay pot she had finally placed on the lodge's sunniest windowsill, a tiny, brave spear of green broke through the dark soil. The evening star seed had sprouted. She touched the fragile seedling, a feeling swelling in her chest that was too vast for words. The Pack Council's decision was announced under the full moon, the same moon that had witnessed her severance. Corbin, for his crimes of tyranny, brutal conquest, and the intended destruction of Silvervale, was not executed. Silvervale did not deal in death where isolation would suffice. He was to be exiled, magically bound never to form a pack or claim territory again, and cast into the furthest, most desolate northern wastes, a fate perhaps worse than death for a wolf of his ambition. He was a storm sent to blow itself out alone. The defectors were offered a choice: undergo a probationary period within Silvervale, living under strict watch and contributing to the community, or be given supplies and directed to neutral territories to make their own way. Most, to Sienna's quiet surprise, chose to stay. The night before Corbin's exile was to be carried out, Theron came to her in the healer's lodge. Kieran was present, a silent witness. "The pack has spoken on another matter," Theron began, his voice formal but warm. "We have watched you, Sienna. You carry a Luna's heart, but not one forged in dominance. You have a gift for healing the spirit, for seeing the wolf behind the wound. Silvervale has always been led by an alpha and a Luna. Our last Luna passed to the moon 2 winters ago. We have not felt the lack until now." Sienna's breath caught. She understood what was coming. Panic, sweet and sharp, lanced through her. A title, a responsibility, a cage of expectations. Theron saw her fear. He raised a hand. "Hear me. We do not offer this because of a mate bond. That is an old magic, and it has brought you nothing but pain. We offer this by choice, by acclamation. The council, the warriors, the healers, the mothers, they see in you what we need. Not a ruler, but a heart, a Luna of the healing heart. The title hung in the air, so different from any she had ever heard. It was not about standing beside an alpha in power. It was about standing with a pack in its pain. It was about the quiet strength she had discovered in the silence, the empathy born of suffering. She looked at Kieran. He gave a slow, definite nod. It is yours if you want it. She thought of the gilded cage. Then she thought of the roundhouse, the seed, the silent tears in the healer's lodge, the young rogue's hollow eyes. She thought of Arya, whose faint, watchful presence had begun in the past few days to feel less like an echo and more like a companion resting in the sun. This was not a cage, it was a garden, and she had already begun to tend it. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and sure, "but as I am, not as a symbol, but as a healer." Theron's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That is all we ask." Dawn came, clear and cold. On a windswept bluff overlooking the Silvervale Valley, the pack gathered. Corbin, bound and gagged by magic, was handed over to a trusted party of wardens who would see him to his eternal exile. He fixed Sienna with one last glowering look of impotent fury as they led him away. She met his gaze, felt nothing but a distant pity, and then turned her back on him forever. As the first golden rays crested the mountains, painting the mist in the valley below with fire and gold, Theron called for silence. He stood before the assembled pack, the original members and the new, probationary ones, all united by the peace they had defended. "Today, we do not just cast out the old darkness," Theron's voice rang out. "We welcome a new light. By the choice of the pack and by her own courageous heart, I present to you your Luna, Sienna." He stepped aside. Sienna walked forward. She wore no crown, no jewels. She wore the simple clothes of Silvervale, the moonflower pendant resting over her heart and her father's painted stone in her pocket. She looked out at the sea of faces, at Kieran's steady smile, at young Lyra's hopeful gaze, at old Roven's grudging respect, at the hundreds of others whose stories were now entwined with hers. The title Luna had once been a chain, then a ghost, then a fear. Now it was a promise she made to them and to herself. She took a deep breath of the clean dawn air. Then she did something she had not done since she was a carefree girl in Fallow Glen. She tilted her head back, opened her heart, and let her spirit flow into a single, pure, rising note. She howled. It was not the howl of a lost Luna, full of pain and terror. It was not the defiant snarl of a cornered survivor. It was a howl of release, of resilience, of homecoming. It soared over the valley, a melody of hard-won peace and fierce, gentle belonging. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then from beside her, Theron's rich, deep howl joined hers, an alpha's strength supporting a Luna's heart. Kieran's clear, true note wove into the harmony. One by one, then in a rushing, glorious wave, the entire pack of Silvervale added their voices. Warriors and healers, elders and pups, the born and the newly chosen. Their howls intertwined, a complex, beautiful chorus of unity that shook the dew from the grass and rose to greet the rising sun. It was the sound of a pack whole. It was the sound of a lost wolf, found. Sienna stood, her howl the thread that bound the tapestry together. Tears of joy streaming freely down her face. She was anchored not by a chain, but by 100 joining voices. She was held, not in a cage, but in a community. She was Sienna, Luna of the healing heart. She was lost no more. And as the last notes of the shared howl faded into the brightening morning, carried away on the wind toward forgotten cages and new beginnings, a warm, familiar voice, clear and strong for the first time since the severing, spoke softly in the sunlit chamber of her soul. "We are home," Arya said, and they were. If Sienna's fight for freedom moved you, help this story reach others who need it. Tap the like button below. It's the best way to support the channel. Tell me in the comments, what was the most powerful moment for you? Would you have made the same choices? And to never miss a story where broken things are made whole again, subscribe and ring the bell. Thank you for watching. Your support means everything. Until the next tale.